Okay.
Hey, greetings, Amber. Good to
Hi.
see you.
Good to see you
Thank,
too.
thanks for joining us. I know this is a little bit of an odd request geographically. We're here in Atlanta. You're in Alberta, Canada. Are you in Edmonton?
Yes.
And Edmonton's the capital of Alberta.
Yes.
We want to be sure that we get a geographical lesson in here for all these Atlantaites. We're so far away. It's kind of another world thinking about west coast of Canada.
I usually just tell Americans I live north of Montana, and that more or less covers it.
That's pretty good. I have a kind of a life history with the Pacific Northwest, and I lived two different times. I lived up in Alaska, so I have some familiarity, at least with the environs up
Yeah.
there. Um, Now, I want to bring everybody up to speed as to why we're talking today.
All right.
And you are one of the photographers who was selected for the 2019 fence. The fence is currently still on view here in Atlanta, and it's on the West Side Trail, right as it intersects with Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. And it's close to my house, so we get to kind of go over there often and check it out. And the last time I was over there, we have two kids, and our 8-year-old daughter was really interested by your photographs. She's not here right now, but her enthusiasm for your pictures kind of made me take a deeper look. And I was really moved trying to explain to her the situation of that kind of birthed your project that's on the fence. And I'm wondering if you could kind of give folks an overview of what that project is.
So the Wet'suwet'en people in northern British Columbia or central British Columbia, they have never signed treaty. So there's a whole group of Indigenous people in the west side of Canada that never signed treaty. And there's legal standing to say that their territory is still theirs, that actually Canada doesn't have a claim to it. But there's some court completions that haven't been done. So in the meantime, they're facing down a whole bunch of resource activity in their territory and trying to protect the little bit that they have left that's still viable for, hunting and traditional uses and those kinds of things. And it's escalated into the situation where you see this modern day iteration of state violence against Indigenous people that, to my mind, echoes very much what happened at the time of first contact, when we were trying to coerce people off of their land so that, we could take advantage of it.
I'm going to actually load in a photo or two of yours while we're talking here. Hopefully it'll be successful. It'll just take me a second. And this was the image that grabbed my daughter's attention, and what you were talking about, this kind of use of force, and it seemed rare to me that you see a picture like this that in which the subject is at a physical turning point and an emotional turning point, and has a look of fear as much as a look of strength, which is this kind of incredible combination. It's hard to talk about how pictures stay with you as a viewer or a photographer, but ever since spending some time looking at this woman's face and thinking about why she's there, why she's behind a fence, why these police are on another side, it has really stuck with me.
That's a really good read of it. That's Sabina Dennis. She's not Wet'suwet'en herself. She's a Carrier, member of the Carrier Nation, which is like an adjacent First Nation. But she's very integral and part of that movement. She's really involved in that front line. And she was afraid in that moment. And she was also really strong. She was singing and calling out to them and, doing a whole bunch of things that, you just can't capture with photographs. But I'm glad that some of the energy came through in the still anyways.
Absolutely. So what was kind of the stalemate that was happening on this day that you were photographing in this moment? Was it resolved by the end of day, or is this an ongoing kind of front for this protest?
It's not at all resolved, but at the end of that day, everybody who was there was either taken off the territory or arrested. So they were either gone back into the hills or they were arrested. So that day they arrested 14 people, which, for some of the bigger movements at Standing Rock doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot when you're 70 kilometers up a remote mountain road in interior British Columbia. And the size of the force that they brought for this relatively small group of people was also really shocking. It was like watching the army march in.
Wow. Here's another view, and it feels like this is probably at a similar location, if not the same location.
It's a similar location, but not exactly the same. Just to give a lay of the land, Wet'suwet'en people have very distinct described territorial boundaries. And so the first picture was taken at Gidimt'en clan territory at their checkpoint. And this picture is at the Unistoten clan checkpoint. So if you can imagine a 70-kilometer long mountain road, so logging road or something.
Sure.
And at around 44 kilometers is the Gidimt'en checkpoint, and around 66 kilometers up is the Unistoten checkpoint. So it's just two different clans of the same nation.
So the desire of the government here is an access desire to get at certain natural resources, I assume?
Yeah, there's a pipeline project that has the official approvals. The hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en people say they've never given consent, which is to them very, very important, that they've never had felt that they've been properly consulted, and not just consulted, but that they've never given consent. And so although the government has approved it, the hereditary chiefs are dead set against it. And so they were blocking the road to prevent access for workers for this pipeline project. And then the RCMP, which is the National Police Force, enforced. They came to break down the barricades and to arrest people who were impeding that access.
By the way, the kind of phrase, this caption, I don't know what kind of screen folks might be on. It might be rendering okay on other kinds of phones or screens. But this graffiti here, I believe it says force is not consent.
Yeah.
And this consent issue playing into what you're describing as being the part of the argument that's ongoing here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, honestly, it's important for this particular nation for them to have consent, but also it underlines what's happening with many different First Nations across Canada, in that we have rules in our there's laws that say that you have to consult with Indigenous people about projects that affect their territory, but that consultation has been really broadly criticized because it doesn't amount to a veto. So, they can talk and talk and talk, and they'll have all these meetings with, industry. And at the end of the day, industry is going to do the project regardless. And so it's really not a good bargaining position. So they call it consultation, and they can say, we have a particularly important forest in this area. Maybe you could go in the other direction, and they may be accounted for, or they may not be. But ultimately, if they want no development, they don't have that option. So that's not really real consent,
Yeah.
to say that somebody signed an agreement when they could never have said no. That's kind of the situation here.
It's odd too, because that makes everything that happens downstream for lack of a better metaphor, it becomes almost performative. We're performing this, that the government's listening and caring,
Oh man, that's exactly what Canada is. There's a lot of talk about reconciliation and a lot of performance of including people in conversations. But at the end of the day, industry does what it wants, government does what it wants, and they decide what's appropriate or not appropriate. So it's like, in many cases, Indigenous people are included at the table, but it's like a very junior position. You're allowed to register your complaint. but do they have to do anything about the complaints? No, not really.
Wow. So I did visit your website earlier and saw that you also photographed at Standing Rock. Just kind of an odd coincidence. Last week we were talking with Ryan Visions, who also is from here in Atlanta and photographed at Standing Rock as well.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about your experience with a kind of Canadian perspective there. Did it feel like, it sounds like what you're describing in British Columbia is no different than what happens here. Tell me a little bit about how things looked at Standing Rock to you from a Canadian photographer's perspective.
I actually, this project, this Unistoten project, preceded me going to Standing Rock. The first time I visited these encampments, they've been there for over a decade, and the first time I visited was in 2015. So this kind of conflict was already on my radar, which is where an Indigenous group says no, and they really have no power to back that up. What I found really remarkable at Standing Rock was the solidarity from the different nations from all across, what they call Turtle Island, so all across North America and even the world, which to me seemed really revolutionary in the sense that what works, or the reason why Indigenous people have been continuously bullied, or part of why they haven't been able to have their complaints registered, is that they're all divided into these small bands, remote places. So it's a relatively small group of people who have to fight these major mega projects. And in the case of Standing Rock, you had, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people coming to back them up. So it changed the power dynamic in a really interesting way. So I was really moved by that solidarity. And then in other ways, I think it was almost not at all different than things that I see in Canada.
Yeah.
I think part of the Canadian story is that we're the nice guy because we're not as brutal as some of the history in America.
Yay!
I know.
Small victories.
Oh, but it's not really true. We've used really much the same tactics, with potentially a few less overtly violent tactics, but ultimately it's the same thing. We violently separated Indigenous people from their land and tried to control them for the last 150 years. And so to that end, it's ultimately the same thing. What underpins Standing Rock was the failure to honor the treaty that exists. There's a legal document that says that territory should be theirs and they should be able to make decisions about it. But it's been undermined and pared away and erased by common use. But ultimately, if that treaty was being respected or followed, there would have never needed to be a Standing Rock. There would have been no need for that.
It's interesting how much attention Standing Rock received, in that people went there from all over, like you were saying about Turtle Island, with people from different tribes. I remember seeing people from New Mexico making the journey up there, and even pulling in people who've become future politicians. It seemed like a galvanizing moment in ways, possibly because it was also during the Obama administration, and people felt, well, if this has a chance to end well, maybe now's the chance. And it didn't play out that way. But it seems like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm bringing it up, that it may be more of a pivotal thing 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, where you can see the effects of what that demonstration was able to do in the careers of all the people who intersected it, yours included.
I would say that's true. It makes me think of, I'm not sure if it's on your radar, but in Canada in about 2014, 2015, we had Idle No More, which was this
I've seen that, right.
rolling series of public demonstrations that Indigenous people were just saying, essentially, we're not going to be quiet anymore. And it was pretty broadly criticized for being a little bit unfocused. But ultimately, they have a lot of issues to bring to the table. So it was many Indigenous issues kind of mixed in together. And at the end of it, they just kind of stopped happening. But what ended up happening was that there was relationships forged in those movements, that there was energy cultivated, that just because people weren't in the streets anymore didn't mean that they weren't still organizing and working on different projects. And a lot of it was the seed starter for a lot of really important foundational changes that I see in the communities here today. And I think Standing Rock is the same. It was a meeting point, a fertile soil for people to plant the seeds for other movements and other relationships. And just because you don't see them on the front line, just because those camps aren't there, doesn't
Right.
mean that it's gone away. It's not over. There's still a lot to do.
I have kind of a procedural question for you. With Atlanta Celebrates Photography, we've been one of the kind of host cities for the fence for years now. Maybe it's our 5th year. We have it in different locations around the city. It isn't always in the same place. I'm curious if, so your photographs made in Canada arrived on the fence, definitely spoke to me and my family, and we're having this conversation. Have you had any other impacts where people in fence cities might have gotten in touch with you about your particular project?
Not specific to the fence.
What?
No, but I'm dying to know. I am dying to know
Please.
about your daughter. I want to know what a 10-year-old, when she looks at that picture, and your daughter might be an outlier in that I'm assuming she must have a really good visual literacy that maybe not every 10-year-old does.
She's around photographs all the time, and we talk about them often in ways that probably most 8-year-olds aren't talking about pictures.
Right.
But our conversation about this image that's behind me was really focused on this kind of emotion of the moment. And I think that if you're 8 years old and you're living in a world where occasionally you see a kind of strong female cartoon character doing things, and you're starting to read things about strong female characters, here was a real picture of a real person who might have had a little bit of superhero feeling to them. And I think she was really connecting with that. And I hope that other people who might be just seeing this now for the first time might feel similarly. What are you working on now, Amber? And how have you been have you been sheltering in place the whole time? Have you still been doing jobs? Are you still getting out? What's it like up in Edmonton?
Well, I'm fortunate in the sense that relative to some of the worst hit places, Edmonton's fairly quiet in terms of COVID, but I still have to take precautions and have been home a lot more, and seen a lot of work drop off, which is honestly for the best under the circumstances, because every assignment is a little bit complicated. You have to think through the best way to do it and how to be safe for other people and how to be safe for yourself. So I don't know. I guess I in the scheme of things, I have a lot to be grateful for. I have, I have enough money to get by, my rent's paid, I have a place to work, I have
That's great.
outside space, I can go for walks, it's not so complicated. And so I have been doing, like I said, a few assignments, some portraits and things like that are appropriately distanced. But for the most part, I'm trying to refocus and plan for when I can come out of quarantine, or when we can come out of the socially distanced time.
Now, if you live down here in Atlanta, you could be out partying in the streets all week. It's only some of us here.
I think it's they're loosening the restrictions, but I'm just still trying to be as careful as possible.
Absolutely.
And I think especially this has been so strange because it's one thing to be brave for yourself and say I'm not worried about myself, but the whole situation of being an asymptomatic carrier has made it that it's not my responsibility to me. I have to be so careful because I can't live with the idea that somebody let me into their life for a moment because they wanted to share their story and I made them sick or caused some kind of outfall in their life. That's just not acceptable to me. So absolutely,
those are smart choices. I have a last tiny question would be, of course, photography and Instagram are in this amazing, whatever kind of marriage. of digital media. And I was curious, as an organization, we've had issues with Instagram, with them flagging our account and even taking it down for a few months
Whoa.
last year without notice or warning and without ever telling us what happened and without explanation. And I saw your statement on your bio, which is your photo Bracken, like, and it's a private account. And you said, hey, I'm taking this account private just to keep people from being able to embed my photos without telling me, notifying me, paying me, and whatever else. And I was just curious as to what your thoughts were about Instagram and photography in this kind of united platform.
I feel like it's an uphill battle
Yeah.
against Instagram, because the reality is they don't really care about us. They don't care about the journalists and the photographers and the artists as much as they care about the influencers. So it's an uphill battle. I don't know. It might just be symbolic. I might cave at some point, but for now, it felt like I could at least do something to protect myself and maybe to send a message. It would be awesome if more people would do it,
Yeah.
because Instagram would notice. I think it impedes, too many private accounts impedes their algorithms and the way that things are supposed to go.
Absolutely.
But I do feel really strongly that photographer rights are really important, and not just because it's my creative work and I own it and blah blah blah, but because especially when you're working on stories that have sensitive or nuanced content, it's really important that I be able to somewhat control where it's shown and how, and then the proper context is included. And if anyone can grab it at any time and do what they like with it, it's too hard to keep my promises to the people that share stories with me.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's completely understandable when you're photographing these sensitive subjects that you're working with that are born from real relationships and real FaceTime with people. It's understandable.
Yeah.
I want to be able to point people to your website. It's amberbracken.com, correct?
Yep.
Any other way for people to stay in touch and to follow up with you if they have more questions?
Yeah, I'm accessible on Instagram and Twitter. I'm Photo Bracken on both, and my account's private, but I'm accepting everybody. It's not a real private account. It's just like extra admin for me to like let everyone be a follower. So yeah,
excellent
messages there.
I totally thank you for your time. I'm glad that you consented to this geographically disparate conversation. It's a pleasure to be able to get to know you and to talk to somebody who's in a faraway place doing really incredible stuff. So thank you for sharing your photography with us, and we're glad that it's appearing here in Atlanta on the Fence. If anybody wants to go see it, acpinfo.org and then /fence map will take you to this map, which shows the location, that top blue dot right there on MLK Junior Drive. And it's there if you're starting to get back out and need some exercise on Atlanta's Beltline. Go check it out. Thank you, Amber.
Can I share one quick story about Sabina, the story that grabbed your
Absolutely, yeah. Let me bring her up again. Yeah.
Because you said maybe she captured a bit of superhero for you. And so I want to tell you a story about Sabina that does capture how much of a badass and how strong this woman is. So went back again this year. There was a similar situation developing just this past winter. So I was there for most of January and into February. But Sabina was there. And the first time that I stopped in, they actually closed the road behind me. So I went into camp to photograph this moment. And then the road got closed behind me. And when I say closed, they dropped trees across the road, and then it snowed over top of it. And there was it was impassable except by snow machines, which there were none, for about 5 kilometers. And I had to leave. I had to get back to Edmonton, and I had some assignments and other obligations I needed to do. So Sabina, in this photograph, helped me hike out 5 kilometers. When I went in, I didn't go in light because I didn't actually realize that they were planning on closing the road. That was not my level of knowledge. So I had a roller case with like extra cameras. I brought film bodies. I brought a lot of stuff. My big laptop, and then plus my big backpack with all my gear. and it's 5 kilometers across sticky snow, no no trails or anything. So I went the day I had to leave and started to make the hike out. Sabina said she would come with me just a little ways. Well, she ended up hiking me out the entire way, and I have photographs of her holding my roller bag over her head with 2 hands, just like Atlas, like Atlas.
Right.
And hiking over these fallen trees. I mean, I've never been so amazed by somebody's just strength, like just the strongest person.
It's a 3-mile hike for those of us in the U.S. too, who can't do the kilometer conversion. That's
oh yeah, great.
3 mile, 3 miles of deep snow. It's no small feat. Thank you, Amber. Again, appreciate you taking the time, and go see Amber's work on the fence.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Cheers, Amber. Bye-bye.
Bye.